The morning sun barely touched the rocky hills of Afghanistan when Sergeant Jake felt something was wrong. His patrol of 8 soldiers had been walking through the narrow valley for 2 hours, and the silence bothered him. Usually, there would be sounds of birds, insects, or distant village life echoing through the mountains. But today, nothing. Raised his fist, signaling his men to stop. Behind him, Corporal Danny crouched low, scanning through his rifle scope. Private First Class Maria Santos checked her radio, making sure they still had contact with base camp. The other 5 soldiers spread out in a defensive formation they had practiced hundreds of times. "Something doesn't feel right, Sarge," whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind whistling through the rocks above them. Nodded. He had been leading patrols in this region for 8 months, and his gut instincts had kept his men alive more times than he could count. The valley they were crossing was known as Green Canyon, though there was nothing green about it except for a few scattered bushes clinging to life between the stones. Their mission was simple: reach the village of Kandahar Ridge, deliver medical supplies to the local clinic, and return to base before nightfall. It was supposed to be a routine operation, the kind they had done dozens of times before. The intelligence reports showed no enemy activity in the area for the past 3 weeks. But experience told him that sometimes the quietest days could turn deadly in seconds. "Santos, tried to raise headquarters," he ordered quietly. "Tell them we're proceeding with caution." Santos adjusted her radio equipment and spoke in hushed tones. "Base, this is Patrol 7. We are approximately 2 clicks from the village. All quiet so far. Over." The radio crackled with static before the familiar voice of Lieutenant Colonel Harrison came through. "Copy, Patrol 7. Weather reports show clear skies for the next 6 hours. Proceed as planned. Check in every 30 minutes. Over." Felt a small knot of tension in his stomach. Clear weather was good for their mission, but it also meant perfect visibility for anyone who might be watching them from the surrounding hills. He studied the terrain ahead through his binoculars. The path forward led through a narrow section of the valley where the walls closed in on both sides. It was the perfect place for an ambush, but it was also the only way to reach their destination without adding 4 hours to their journey. Command had chosen this route specifically because satellite images showed no signs of enemy presence. "Listen up," said, gathering his men in a tight circle. "We're going through the narrow section ahead. I want Martinez and Johnson on point 20 meters ahead. And Santos, you watch the right ridge, and Williams take the left, and I will cover the rear. Everyone stays alert. If anything moves up there, I want to know about it immediately." The soldiers nodded and moved into position. They had worked together for months, and each man knew his job perfectly. Martinez, a quiet soldier from Texas, had the sharpest eyes in the unit. Johnson, barely 20 years old but already a veteran of 3 deployments, could spot movement from incredible distances. As they began moving through the narrow section, couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The walls of the canyon rose 50 feet on either side, creating deep shadows even in the bright morning sun. Small rocks occasionally tumbled down from above, probably disturbed by wind or small animals, but each sound made the soldiers tense up. "Movement on the left ridge," whispered into his radio. "Looks like a bird, but I'm keeping eyes on it." Acknowledged the report and continued scanning his sector. His rifle was ready, safety off, finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Behind him, the unit's medic carried not only his medical supplies but also extra ammunition for the squad's machine gun. They were halfway through the narrow section when Martinez suddenly raised his fist and dropped to one knee. Everyone immediately stopped and took cover behind whatever rocks they could find, crawled forward to where Martinez was positioned. "What do you see?" asked. Martinez pointed toward a cluster of boulders about 100 meters ahead. "Thought I saw sunlight reflecting off something metallic, Sarge. Could be nothing, but it caught my eye." Studied the area through his binoculars. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, for just a split second, he caught the same reflection Martinez had spotted. It could have been anything: a piece of metal debris, an old bullet casing, or something much more dangerous. "Santos, get on the radio. Tell base we may have possible enemy contact," ordered. Before Santos could respond, the quiet morning exploded into chaos. The first shot came from the right ridge, followed immediately by automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. The enemy had been waiting for them to reach the perfect kill zone, and now they were trapped in a deadly crossfire. "Ambush, take cover," shouted as bullets began ricocheting off the rocks around them. His men reacted instantly, diving behind whatever protection they could find. But the enemy had chosen their positions well. The patrol was caught in the open with limited cover, and the incoming fire was accurate and intense. Johnson cried out as a bullet grazed his shoulder, but he kept firing back at the muzzle flashes on the ridges above. Was trying to identify targets on the right side while dodging bullets that were chipping away at the rock he was hiding behind. Realized immediately how bad their situation was. The enemy had the high ground, better cover, and had clearly planned this ambush carefully. His small patrol was outnumbered and, "Santos, we need immediate backup. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions," he shouted over the noise of battle. The radio crackled back. "Patrol 7, air support is 30 minutes out. Can you hold your position?" 30 minutes might as well have been 30 hours. At the rate the enemy was pouring down fire, wasn't sure his men could survive 30 minutes. They needed a miracle, and they needed it soon. What none of them knew was that high above on a distant ridge, someone had been watching the entire situation unfold through a powerful scope. Someone who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Someone who was about to change everything. Staff Sergeant had been lying motionless on the cold stone for over 4 hours. Her suit, carefully crafted with local vegetation and colored fabric, made her nearly invisible against the rocky outcrop 800 meters from the valley floor. Through her high-powered scope, she had watched patrol enter what she knew was a carefully prepared kill zone. Was a Marine sniper, attached to a special reconnaissance unit operating independently in the region. Her mission was intelligence gathering, not direct combat support, but as she watched the ambush unfold below, she made a decision that would change everything. She had spotted the enemy positions 2 days earlier while conducting surveillance on suspected insurgent movement in the area. Through patient observation, she had identified at least 12 fighters positioned in carefully concealed positions along both ridges of the narrow valley. They had been waiting for the right target, and patrol had walked directly into their trap. "Come on, come on," she whispered to herself as she watched the soldiers below scrambling for cover under withering enemy fire. Could see muzzle flashes from 6 different positions. The insurgents had set up a classic L-shaped ambush with overlapping fields of fire that left the patrol with almost no safe areas for movement. From her elevated position, she could see what and his men could not, more enemy fighters moving into position to cut off any possible escape route. Her radio crackled quietly. "Overwatch 7, this is Command. Do you have eyes on Patrol 7? Keyed her microphone. "Command, this is Overwatch 7. I have visual on Patrol 7. They are taking heavy fire from approximately 12 enemy positions. They need immediate assistance." "Overwatch 7, your orders are to observe and report only. Air support is en route." Looked through her scope again. Below, she could see one of the soldiers. It looked like the young one called Johnson, bleeding from what appeared to be a shoulder wound. Another soldier was pinned down behind a rock that was being steadily chipped away by enemy fire. They wouldn't last until air support arrived. "Command, at current rate of enemy fire, Patrol 7 will be overrun before air support arrives. Request permission to engage." There was a long pause before the reply came. "Overwatch 7, you are not equipped for sustained engagement. Maintain position and continue observation." Stared through her scope at the chaos below. She had joined the Marines because she believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. She had become a sniper because she was good at it, and because she understood that sometimes one well-placed shot could save many lives. She made her decision. "Command, experiencing radio difficulties. Say again your last transmission." Without waiting for a response, she switched her radio to the emergency frequency that's Patrol would be monitoring. "Patrol 7, this is Guardian Angel. I have Overwatch on your position. Can you identify your most immediate threat?" His voice came back immediately, strained but professional. "Guardian Angel, we have heavy fire from the right ridge, approximately your 2 o'clock position from our perspective. Multiple shooters in elevated positions." Was already adjusting her scope, calculating distance, wind speed, and bullet drop. Her rifle was a custom M40A5 with modifications that made it accurate at distances most snipers could only dream of. She had spent countless hours practicing in conditions exactly like these. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle flash of what appeared to be the enemy's primary machine gun position. The gunner was protected by a wall of sandbags and rocks, but every few seconds, when he shifted to acquire new targets, a small portion of his upper torso became visible. Controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and waited for the perfect moment. The shot rang out across the valley like thunder. 800 meters away, the enemy machine gun fell silent. "Guardian Angel, that was a beautiful shot," Kame's voice over the radio. "Can you see the position at our 11 o'clock?" Was already scanning for her next target. She could see an insurgent with an RPG moving between rocks, trying to get into position for a shot that would devastate patrol. The man was moving carefully, using cover effectively, but had the patience of a hunter. She waited. 30 seconds passed. 45. Then the man made a critical mistake. He exposed himself for just a moment to get a better view of his targets below. The second shot echoed across the canyon. The RPG threat was eliminated. "Two down, Guardian Angel. You're giving us breathing room," reported. But could see what couldn't. More insurgents were moving into position from a hidden ravine on the far side of the valley. If they reached the high ground, they would have a perfect angle to attack patrol from behind. "Patrol 7, you have enemy movement from the North Ravine. Approximately 8 hostiles moving to flank your position. You need to move now." Patrol began moving immediately, using the temporary reduction in enemy fire to bound from cover to cover toward better defensive positions. But knew the reprieve wouldn't last long. The remaining enemy fighters would soon realize they were being targeted by a sniper, and they would either retreat or try to locate and eliminate her. She had to make every shot count. Through her scope, she tracked the movement of the flanking force. They were well trained, moving in proper tactical formation with good spacing between individuals. These weren't local farmers with rifles. These were experienced fighters who understood how to use terrain and cover. As she watched, the lead insurgent stopped and began scanning the surrounding ridges with binoculars. He was looking for her. Knew she had perhaps 30 seconds before he spotted the slight disturbance her position created in the natural landscape. Even with her camouflage, an experienced observer with good optics could eventually identify her location. She needed to eliminate him first. The distance was nearly 900 meters now, and the target was partially concealed behind a rocky outcrop. Had made longer shots, but never under combat conditions with friendly forces depending on her accuracy. She adjusted for the increased distance and the slight crosswind that had developed. Through her scope, she could see the insurgent raise his binoculars toward her general area. The third shot was her most difficult yet. The bullet traveled for just over 1 second before finding its target. Below in the valley, patrol had reached better defensive positions and was beginning to return effective fire, but could see the enemy was regrouping, and she knew the battle was far from over. Her radio crackled with an urgent transmission from command. "Overwatch 7, acknowledge your status immediately." Ignored the radio and focused on her scope. The real fight was just beginning. The enemy had figured out they were being hunted by a sniper, and they were adapting quickly. Watched through her scope as the remaining insurgents changed their tactics, staying in deeper cover and moving only when absolutely necessary. The intensity of fire directed at patrol had decreased, but it was still deadly accurate. "Guardian Angel, we're in better positions now, but we're still pinned down," reported over the radio. "Can you see the sniper on the left ridge? He's keeping us from moving toward the extraction point." Scan the left ridge methodically. These fighters were good. They understood that her biggest advantage was their movement and exposure. If they stayed hidden and patient, they could wait for reinforcements or for her to run out of ammunition. After several minutes of careful observation, she spotted what was talking about. There was indeed an enemy sniper positioned in a natural hide among a cluster of boulders about 600 meters from position. The man was using the same tactics she was, remaining perfectly still, and only exposing himself for the brief moments necessary to take aimed shots. The difference was that she had the better position and the better equipment. Studied the enemy sniper's hide carefully. He was well concealed, but she could see the slight shadow his body created and the occasional glint of his scope when the sun hit it at the right angle. More importantly, she could predict where he would have to move to get clear shots at men. She waited. Below, the firefight continued. Soldiers were making the enemy pay for every shot, but ammunition was becoming a concern. The medic had patched up Johnson's shoulder wound, but the young soldier was losing blood and needed proper medical attention. Guardian Angel called over the radio, his voice tight with concern. Johnson needs a medevac. How long until we can move to the extraction point? Could see the extraction point was referring to a relatively flat area about 200 meters south of their current position, where a helicopter could safely land. But the route to that position was completely exposed to fire from the enemy sniper on the left ridge. Patrol 7, I need you to suppress that sniper position on your count of 3. Make him keep his head down for about 10 seconds. Roger, Guardian Angel, on your call. Centered her crosshairs on the area where she calculated the enemy sniper would have to expose himself to return fire. The distance was manageable, but the target would only be visible for a fraction of a second. Patrol 7, execute suppression, now. Entire patrol opened fire on the enemy sniper position simultaneously. As had predicted, the enemy sniper was forced to move slightly to avoid the incoming rounds, and for just a moment, his shoulder and part of his head became visible. The shot was perhaps her most precise yet. The enemy sniper threat was eliminated. Outstanding shot, Guardian Angel. That opens up our movement to the south, reported. But was already tracking new threats. Through her scope, she could see dust clouds in the distance that indicated vehicles approaching the valley. The enemy was bringing reinforcements, and they would arrive long before friendly air support could reach the area. Patrol 7, you have enemy vehicles approaching from the west. Looks like 3 trucks, probably carrying additional fighters. You need to move to extraction now. Didn't hesitate. Copy, Guardian Angel. Beginning movement to extraction point. Can you provide overwatch? Affirmative, moving now. Began the careful process of repositioning herself. Her current location gave her excellent coverage of the valley floor and the eastern ridges, but the approaching vehicles would come from a direction that was partially blocked by terrain features. She needed to move to a position that would allow her to engage the new threats while still providing cover for movement. The problem was that any movement on her part risked exposing her position to the remaining enemy fighters scattered around the valley. If they spotted her, she would quickly become the primary target for every insurgent in the area. She had spent years training for exactly this type of situation. Moving unseen across hostile terrain was as much a part of being a sniper as accurate shooting. Carefully packed her equipment, keeping only what was essential, and began a slow, methodical movement across toward her new position. Every few meters, she paused to observe the valley below through her scope. Patrol was making good progress toward the extraction point, moving in short bounds from cover to cover. The remaining enemy fighters were focusing their attention on the patrol, which gave her the opportunity she needed to reposition. After 20 minutes of careful movement, reached her new position. She was now 850 meters from the extraction point with clear fields of fire toward the approaching enemy vehicles and the remaining insurgent positions. Through her scope, she could see the 3 enemy trucks more clearly now. They were military-style vehicles, probably stolen from government forces, and each appeared to be carrying 6 to 8 fighters. If those reinforcements reached the valley before patrol could extract, the situation would become hopeless. Patrol 7, what's your status? She called over the radio. Guardian Angel, we're 50 meters from the extraction point, but we're taking fire from at least 2 positions on the eastern ridge. Johnson is getting worse. We need that medevac immediately. Could see the problem. The remaining enemy fighters had repositioned themselves to cover the extraction point, and patrol was pinned down just short of safety. The enemy vehicles were less than 5 minutes away. She made another decision that went against her orders and her training. Instead of staying in her concealed position and picking off individual targets, she was going to have to engage the vehicles directly. Adjusted her scope for the increased distance to the lead vehicle. Shooting at vehicles with a sniper rifle was not ideal. She would need to target the drivers to have any real effect, and the range was at the very edge of her weapon's effective capability. The lead truck was bouncing across rough terrain, making it a difficult target. She would have to time her shot for a moment when the vehicle was relatively stable, and she would have to account for its movement as well as the distance. Through her scope, she could see the driver of the lead vehicle clearly. He was a bearded man wearing traditional Afghan clothing, and he was pushing the truck hard across the rocky ground. In the back of the truck, she could count 8 fighters armed with rifles and what appeared to be an RPG. Controlled her breathing and waited for the perfect moment. The truck hit a relatively smooth section of ground, and for just a few seconds it stopped bouncing. Her shot struck the driver's center mass. The truck immediately swerved off course and rolled into a deep ravine. The second and third vehicles stopped immediately, and she could see fighters jumping out and taking cover. But her message had been received. The enemy reinforcements were no longer rushing toward the valley. Guardian Angel, beautiful shooting. That bought us some time, reported. But we still can't reach the extraction point. Turned her attention back to the eastern ridge, where the remaining enemy fighters were preventing movement. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the reinforcements from the vehicles organized themselves and either attacked her position or resumed their advance toward the valley. It was time to end this fight once and for all. Had approximately 6 rounds remaining in her current magazine and 1 spare magazine in her pack. Against normal tactical doctrine, she was about to engage multiple enemy positions in rapid succession to create a window of opportunity for Patrol to reach safety. Through her scope, she identified the 2 enemy positions that were most effectively preventing movement. The first was a fighting position built into the natural rock formations about 400 meters east of the extraction point. The second was a more hastily constructed position using loose rocks and debris, approximately 200 meters northeast of its current location. The fighters in these positions were experienced. They were exposing themselves minimally and timing their movements to avoid giving her clear shots, but had been studying their patterns for the past 10 minutes, and she had noticed something important. They were coordinating their fire in a way that created brief periods when one position would be active while the other reloaded or repositioned. Patrol 7, when I engage the eastern positions, you'll have approximately 15 seconds to move toward extraction. Be ready. Copy. Guardian Angel, standing by. Centered her crosshairs on the first position and waited. She could see slight movement in the shadows between the rocks where she knew at least 2 fighters were positioned. One of them would have to expose himself soon to maintain effective fire on Patrol. A muzzle flash erupted from the position, and in the split second after the shot, she saw her target. The insurgent was using a technique many fighters employed, firing, and immediately moving to a new position within the same general area. But his new position brought him into her line of sight for just a moment. Her first shot eliminated the primary threat from the eastern position. Immediately, she shifted her aim to the northeastern position. The fighters there had heard her shot and were probably trying to locate her position, but they were also trying to maintain pressure on Patrol. One of them made the mistake of exposing too much of himself while trying to get a better angle on the soldiers below. Her second shot rang out before the echo of the first had completely faded. Move now, she called over the radio. Patrol burst from their covered positions and ran hard toward the extraction point. They moved with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had trained together extensively, covering each other in alternating bounds while maintaining awareness of the remaining threats around them. Continued scanning for targets, ready to engage any enemy fighter who tried to interfere with the patrol's movement. She could see muzzle flashes from several positions around the valley, but the enemy fire was much less coordinated now, and most of it was inaccurate due to the rapid elimination of their most effective fighting positions. Guardian Angel, we've reached the extraction point, reported breathlessly. Johnson is stable, but we need that medevac now. Could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The cavalry was finally arriving, but she knew the enemy reinforcements from the vehicles would make one final push to prevent the evacuation. Through her scope, she could see the fighters from the crashed and stopped vehicles organizing themselves into assault formation. They were approximately 600 meters from the extraction point and advancing carefully but steadily. There were at least 12 of them, and they were using proper tactical movement techniques. Patrol 7, you have enemy infantry advancing from the west. 12 to 15 fighters moving toward your position in assault formation. Copy. Guardian Angel. How long until they reach effective range? Studied the terrain and the enemy's rate of movement. Approximately 8 minutes at their current pace. The sound of helicopter rotors was getting louder. but knew from experience that medical evacuation under fire was a complex and dangerous operation. The helicopter would need at least 5 minutes on the ground to safely load Johnson and prepare for departure. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. The enemy would reach effective range before the evacuation could be completed. "Guardian Angel, can you slow down that advance?" asked over the radio. Was already calculating angles and distances. The advancing enemy force was using good spacing and cover, making them a difficult target for a single sniper. But she had to try. Her next shot targeted the lead elements of the advancing force. The man she hit was carrying what appeared to be a radio, probably their unit leader. His elimination would disrupt their coordination and slow their advance while they reorganized. The enemy force immediately went to ground and began using more cautious movement techniques. Had bought some time, but not enough. The medical evacuation helicopter was now visible in the distance, approaching fast and low across the valley floor. It was a U-60 Black Hawk with medical equipment and a crew trained specifically for combat rescues. But it was also a large, slow-moving target that would be vulnerable during the critical minutes it spent on the ground. "Guardian Angel, the medevac is 2 minutes out," reported. "Can you provide cover for the extraction?" Was already repositioning herself for better coverage of the landing zone. She had perhaps 4 rounds left in her current magazine, and the situation was about to become much more complicated. As the helicopter approached the extraction point, the remaining enemy fighters around the valley began concentrating their fire on the aircraft. Could see tracer rounds streaking across the valley toward the Black Hawk, and she knew the pilots were flying into an extremely dangerous situation to save Johnson's life. The helicopter flared for landing and began engaging any enemy position that fired at the aircraft. Her shots were rapid but precise, forcing the insurgents to take cover just when they most wanted to concentrate their fire on the vulnerable helicopter. But the advancing enemy force was now close enough to engage the landing zone with small arms fire, and could see more fighters moving into position from other areas of the valley. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Guardian Angel's voice came over the radio with unmistakable urgency. "We're loading Johnson now, but we're taking heavy fire. The pilots say they can't wait much longer." Through her scope, could see patrol forming a defensive perimeter around the helicopter, while the medical crew worked frantically to stabilize Johnson for transport. The Black Hawk's door gunners were returning fire, but they were vastly outnumbered. Made her final tactical decision of the engagement. Instead of trying to engage individual targets from her distant position, she was going to provide the most effective support possible for the evacuation, even if it meant compromising her own safety. She began moving toward the valley floor, abandoned her concealed position, and began a rapid descent down the rocky slope toward the valley floor. Every principle of sniper doctrine told her this was wrong. Snipers were supposed to remain hidden, engage from distance, and avoid close combat at all costs. But sometimes principles had to be set aside for something more important. As she moved, she could hear the helicopter's engines straining against the thin air and the increasing intensity of enemy fire. Through the rocks and brush, she caught glimpses of the landing zone where patrol was fighting desperately to protect the medical evacuation. "Guardian Angel, where are you?" His voice came over the radio, strained with the effort of coordinating his men's defense while under heavy fire. "Moving to support," replied, sliding down a steep section of loose rock and struggling to maintain control of her rifle and equipment. The advancing enemy force had reached within 200 meters of the landing zone and was preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm small patrol. Could see their muzzle flashes through the terrain features ahead of her, and she could hear the sharp crack of bullets passing close overhead. She reached a position approximately 300 meters from the landing zone with clear fields of fire toward the advancing enemy force. From this distance, with her rifle and training, she could engage targets much more rapidly and effectively than from her previous long-range position. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters moving forward in short rushes, using covering fire and proper infantry tactics. They were well-trained and determined, and they clearly understood that preventing this evacuation would be a significant victory for their cause. His first shot from her new position struck the insurgent carrying the enemy's machine gun. The loss of their primary automatic weapon immediately reduced the effectiveness of their covering fire and slowed their advance. Her second shot eliminated a fighter who was attempting to maneuver around's left flank. The man had been carrying an RPG that could have devastated both the patrol and the helicopter with a single well-placed round. Guardian Angel, excellent shooting. You're right on target, reported. Johnson is loaded, but the pilots need another 2 minutes to complete medical stabilization. 2 minutes was an eternity in combat, and could see that the enemy was regrouping for one final push. They had taken significant casualties, but they still had numerical superiority and the tactical initiative. She heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds and instinctively flattened herself against the rocks. The explosions erupted around the landing zone, walking closer to the helicopter with each round. The enemy had brought indirect fire support, and they were adjusting their aim based on the helicopter's position. "Medevac is taking mortar fire," the helicopter pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "We need to leave now or we're going to lose the aircraft." His voice was calm but urgent. 30 more seconds. Johnson will die if we move him now." Knew what she had to do. The enemy mortar position had to be somewhere on the ridge opposite her previous location, probably 600 to 700 meters away. Finding and engaging it quickly would require every skill she had developed during years of training and combat experience. She began scanning them methodically, looking for the telltale signs of an indirect fire position, disturbed earth, equipment, movement, or the brief flash that preceded each mortar launch. Time was running out, and each second meant another mortar round was probably already in the air. There, a brief reflection of sunlight off metal, followed immediately by the muzzle flash of another mortar round being fired. The position was approximately 750 meters away, partially concealed behind a natural rock formation. Adjusted her scope quickly and lined up her shot. Engaging a mortar position at this distance with a single rifle was extremely difficult, but she had no other options. The target was not the mortar itself, which would be nearly impossible to damage with small arms fire, but the crew operating it. Her shot rang out across the valley, and the mortar fire immediately ceased. She had either eliminated the crew or forced them to abandon their position. "Guardian Angel, mortar fire has stopped. Outstanding work," called over the radio. The helicopter's engines began winding up for departure, and could see through her scope that Johnson had been successfully loaded, and the medical crew was strapping down their equipment. But the advancing enemy infantry was making one final desperate push toward the landing zone. Engaged them as rapidly as she could while maintaining accuracy. Each shot had to count. She was down to her last magazine, and there were still at least 8 enemy fighters advancing on position. Her rifle fire, combined with the defensive efforts of patrol and the helicopter's door gunners, finally broke the enemy assault. The remaining insurgents began falling back to defensive positions, abandoning their attempt to prevent the evacuation. "Guardian Angel, the medevac is airborne," reported. "Johnson is going to make it because of what you did here today." But situation had become critical. Her aggressive movement and repeated firing had revealed her position to the remaining enemy fighters, and they were beginning to concentrate their attention on her. Bullets were striking the rocks around her with increasing frequency, and she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions aimed in her direction. "Patrol 7, I'm taking heavy fire and need to relocate," she transmitted. "Guardian Angel, can you make it to our position? We're not leaving without you." Looked at the terrain between her location and patrol. It was approximately 200 meters of open ground with minimal cover, and the enemy had clear fields of fire across most of the route. Making that movement under the current conditions would be extremely dangerous. But staying in her current position was no longer an option. The enemy had her location pinpointed and were adjusting their fire to eliminate her. "Patrol 7, I'm moving to you now. Provide covering fire on the at your 10 o'clock position." Took a deep breath, shouldered her rifle, and began running towards position. Behind her, she could hear the crack and whine of bullets passing close by, and chips of rock thrown up by near misses stung her face and hands. Patrol opened fire immediately, forcing the enemy shooters to take cover just as broke from her position. The covering fire was accurate and sustained, giving her the protection she needed to cross the most dangerous sections of open ground. She reached position and dove behind the rocks where his men were positioned, breathing hard but uninjured. Around her, the soldiers continued firing at enemy positions while preparing for their own extraction. "Welcome to the party, Guardian Angel," said with a grin. "I'm Sergeant Jake, thanks for keeping us alive today." "Staff Sergeant Marine Corps," she replied, quickly checking her remaining ammunition. "What's our extraction plan?" "Air support is finally inbound, 2 Apache gunships and a Chinook for extraction. ETA 8 minutes. Through the continued enemy fire around them, could hear the distant sound of approaching helicopters. The Apache would make short work of any remaining enemy resistance, and the CH-47 Chinook could extract its entire patrol along with herself. As they waited for the arrival of air support, turned to her with a serious expression. "Guardian Angel, what you did today saved 8 American lives. You disobeyed direct orders to do it, didn't you?" Nodded. Sometimes the orders and the right thing to do aren't the same thing. Smiled and keyed his radio. "Command, this is Patrol 7. Mission accomplished. Johnson is en route for medical treatment and will make a full recovery. Request you include Guardian Angel in our after-action report. Without her support, we would have taken heavy casualties or worse." In the distance, the Apache gunships appeared over the like avenging angels. The remaining enemy fighters immediately began withdrawing from their positions, understanding that their opportunity had passed and their survival now depended on rapid retreat. As the Apache began engaging the withdrawing enemy forces, reflected on the events of the day. She had started the morning as a reconnaissance asset conducting independent surveillance. She was ending it as part of a team that had demonstrated the best traditions of military service, courage, skill, and the willingness to risk everything for fellow soldiers. The CH-47 Chinook touched down in the same landing zone where Johnson had been evacuated, and its patrol along with quickly boarded for extraction. As the helicopter climbed away from the valley floor, looked down at the battlefield where she had spent the most intense hours of her military career. Later, during the official debriefing, her superiors would reprimand her for disobeying orders and exceeding the scope of her mission. But they would also recommend her for the Silver Star for her actions in support of patrol. More importantly, 8 soldiers would return home to their families because of decisions she had made in the heat of battle. In the quiet moments before sleep that night, thought about the morning's silence that had seemed so wrong to, and how that same valley had erupted into a life-and-death struggle by midday. She thought about Johnson, who would recover fully and return to duty. She thought about, and his men, who had fought with courage and skill when everything went wrong. Most of all, she thought about the truth that every combat veteran eventually learns, that sometimes the most important battles are fought not according to the plan, but according to the circumstances, and that sometimes doing the right thing means doing the thing that no one ordered you to do.